Sidhartha Dash, or Sid Dash, for ease of pronunciation and simplicity, from Chartis Research. I'm the chief researcher at Chartis Research, and today we're going to cover automation and AI in risk and control functions. To discuss that, I have two eminent panelists, and I will ask them to introduce themselves, if you will. So, Maninder, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, Sid, and hi, everyone. I'm Maninder Bahra. I'm a non-financial risk expert and formerly Chief Control Officer for retail commercial banking. And I have a key focus really on conduct outcomes for customers and clients and using risk management to create the correct purpose.
Thank you and welcome. Paddy.
Thanks, Sid. I'm Paddy Christie, so I'm Senior Product Owner in the non-financial risk lab at Lloyds Banking Group. So my key focus is on use of tech and data enablers to advance the discipline of managing non-financial risks.
Great. So with that, we're going to really look at automation AI in the risk and control area. And my first question to both of you is, where do you think we are in the state of adoption of AI and related AI automation and related strategies in banks' risk and control areas? Linda.
Thanks, Sid. So I think there's been quite a big shift since post-pandemic, because obviously you had all the digitalization of the front end of banking, etc. So then the risk and control functions have needed to get momentum at pace as well. So there's been a real drive to automate controls and actually simplify those controls as well. And I suppose one of the big steps now is actually retraining some of the individuals in control, risk and control functions, so they can actually leverage the outcomes of that automation. So I think we've moved along quite significantly, but obviously there's an awful lot still to be achieved in the next few years.
Paddy, what about you?
I'd echo that. I think we have seen growth, particularly after the pandemic. I think there's probably two factors driving adoption. So I think the first is using technology, data, AI to improve the effectiveness of risk management in the company, but also improve the efficiency. So I think those two factors are a key driver. And I think what we've seen is some areas of non-financial risk, such as financial crime, in particular, sort of in the AML space, we've seen good development there and use of AI, and we're starting to see that across other use cases as well.
And do you think that the focus on AML and financial crime is a little bit because that's relatively young, or it's also because there's been a huge growth in that area? What do you think is the driver for that to be the sort of more mature in that area?
I think there's a number of factors. I think availability of data and monitoring controls. I think a number of solutions and vendors in that space that have developed over a number of years. And then finally, I think regulatory expectation. And I think we've seen a number of enforcement notices in the UK that highlight issues with manual AML processes and controls. So I think there's been a number of factors that have driven progress in that space.
Sure, thanks. Now, changing the focus a little bit to okay, so we saw where things are. What about where do you think institutions should focus their automation and control activities in the context of the risk function? Is it going to be data? Is it analytics? Is it model risk governance? Where do you think the focus should be?
Where do you start? So I think there's a tendency. There's all these sort of exciting technology advancements, data capabilities or enablers. I think the key thing is to start with clear use cases. And I think for me, looking across the risk profile, you will have lots of useful data in terms of control failures, historic events, losses, compliance issues, audit findings, etc. So I think that's a really useful source to understand actually, where are the areas that that you may want to focus on. I think also understanding the cost profile of your controls is really important. So, I think that can be a really useful data point to understand, where are the most resource intensive controls in your organization, and where would you potentially, direct investment into sort of technology and data initiatives.
And as all of this is obviously you're going beyond just controls into processes and so on, how far do you think process mining is really, how mature is it? How in relative terms and in absolute terms, how mature is that whole idea and whole area, if you will?
I think it's a really exciting area. So I think it's maturing. So I think for me, process mining can be a really, useful diagnostic tool, in terms of helping, leaders understand, how their processes are performing. And I think, controls and de-risking processes is a key part of that. I do think there's some exciting developments in terms of how you can start to link process mining to your GRC tools. So, there may be outputs from process mining that are giving you insights into your controls or risks, production of indicators that I think is useful to ingest that data and create those linkages. So I do think it's a really interesting capability to understand, how end-to-end processes are performing, including where there might be an opportunity to enhance controls.
Yeah. I think the tools are mature. I think it's just maybe sometimes the capability and how we operationalize it and utilize it, and also maintain it in a way that it's useful for many, many years. Because obviously our controls hang off the processes, and therefore if you don't understand the process end to end and it's not maintained in the longer term, it becomes a bit redundant. So I think linking back to the GRC platforms that most organisations have in place and actually understanding what the capabilities within those are, is quite crucial to kind of link together all those technological innovations that are available today.
Right. So that actually takes us to another sort of linked area, if you will. How do you see the evolving AI capabilities impact the state of art in risk and control functions, if you will? I mean, we have seen the nature of AI change in some ways. I mean, initially it was very, very statistical. We're now increasingly seeing the arrival of large language models and the focus on more NLP-oriented AI that sort of links into text, into images, into data sets in very different ways. How do you see that impact the state of art on the risk and control area?
I guess I look at it as a combination of both. So it's not one replaces another. So it's a combination of other tools that are available, and that state of art is developing and the capabilities is developing all the time. But it's using the human intervention from a different lens. So it's the interpretation, the judgment. So I think what AI lends itself to is the covering a very big data set and coming up with connections and outcomes as a result of those connections, which can be assessed. And then it gives you a bit more of clarity for the areas that really need focus. And that's where the human part can really fit in and actually make those judgment calls around, how does that fit into your risk profile? How does that fit into your risk appetite models, etc.? And to assess that from that perspective, because you can't always make those kind of judgment calls in the grey just by using AI. So it's using a combination of all the tools, including human intervention as well.
Of course, human in the loop is going to be critical, but does this also mean that you're going to be able to scan more documents, look at more regulations, think about a broader universe of regulations, or think about regulations in different business lines and countries? Does this broaden your horizon, if you will?
I think that's the part of it that's really exciting. So if I think about a number of different risk management activities, from horizon scanning, so looking at kind of new and emerging risks, I think that relationship that Maninder describes in terms of you can use AI and huge data sets that you wouldn't be able to manually review. A risk practitioner historically wouldn't have the time to do that. So I think but there is a key role for the risk expert to interpret and make sense of the data and the insights that they're being given. I think another example is speech to text. So where we, through consumer duty, we may be listening to phone calls and checking to ensure that customers have received fair outcomes. And again, you require a human to make that judgment, but I think you can use the technology to identify, potentially high risk samples. So, you may search for keywords and focus on customers that have vulnerabilities, for example, and that's where you direct your subject matter experts.
And are there any specific areas where you think much of this is, this new abilities to do broader horizon scanning or new ability to handle very much larger data sets? Say any specific areas like say cyber risk or supply chain, model governance, any specific areas where you think this added power is giving you the ability to really bring things under control, which otherwise would have been really challenging in the, just given the sheer volume of data and the complexity of the data available, if you will.
Yeah, I think one area for me would be regulatory compliance. So, if I think about, compliance traceability and mapping of regulatory rules, potentially in an institution that operates globally, that can be hugely complex and time consuming. So the ability to understand those regulatory inventories, understand changes, but then be able to link through to internal policies, potentially through to other data points in your organization. So, controls, indicators, to build that, view of compliance in your organization. I think that's a really hugely exciting use case where you're using, NLP and potentially other technologies to support with that.
And I think if you look at the whole life cycle of how you identify your taxonomy, doing the risk register, etc., all the way through the process, there's an awful lot of stages within that you can codify and take away some of that heavy lifting. So if you think of it from that perspective, there's a lot of opportunities within that whole end-to-end view. And as Paddy said, regulation is a key. You link it back to policies, you standardize it, and it's codified within your GRC platforms, or you can use AI to assess the outcomes of complying or not complying with it. But it also gives consistency across, especially for global banks and multiple business lines that you might have. It gives us consistency across the board, so you can calibrate a lot better as well.
And does this? I think there was mention of new taxonomies, et cetera. Does this give new areas where the risk function has to be more aware of and more cognizant of and more more willing to get wrap their thinking around, if you will, around the data structure, the taxonomies, ontology of data, etc. Is that something that is a natural new expansion of the risk functions requirements, if you will, given particularly in the non-financial risks, if you will, given the sort of incidence of AI and automation in those areas?
I think we're kind of where we were with model risk a number of years ago, where we trusted the outcome of a model, but we didn't always understand some of the in-depth kind of infrastructure within it. I mean, I'm talking many years ago. So it's still being, so I think it is important for risk and control functions to be far more data-led and data analytical capabilities. And, it's a role that organizations have to scale up their teams to be able to make sure that they're prepared for the future. So there's that side as well. So they understand and know where they might want to challenge something, or it doesn't make sense, I suppose. So you need that capability to do that. But I think it's going back to how you design something from a technology perspective, or using different tools of AI, etc. And do you actually, do you understand how it's coded? Do you understand how it's, what are the biases in there or not? And what the outcome, does it need a little bit of an overlay or something? Does it need to be further scrutinized? So it's actually building that whole end-to-end process, not just spitting out the output, but how do you review and challenge that output to make sure there's comfort around trusting those outcomes as well.
Yeah,
So in
I think
many
that training and
sorry, go ahead.
sorry, so I think training and awareness is key, particularly across a risk function, and I think it's important to look at the process and the how these changes are delivered. So I think taking an iterative approach, where you start with clear use case or hypothesis and take that through into testing, and involve your risk teams at that point of testing before these models are deployed, I think is really key.
I mean, just coming back to that same point, I think the point Maninder made as well, that do you that the risk function needs to, and you're making as well in new training and so on. But to what extent do you think that we fully understand the risks of some of this automation, AI areas, etc., the ability to challenge the algorithms or understand the data? Do you think that all of this has been sort of incorporated, or we are in the journey of figuring some of the risks out, and that will evolve over time, if you will?
I think it is evolving. I mean, the technology is advancing, as we speak. I think it's helpful to consider, sort of the AI risks across your whole risk taxonomy. So, so there's clearly some areas, Maninder, you referenced model risk. There's potentially tech and vendor risks. If you're creating, dependencies on AI, third-party solutions, black box solutions. There's data, GDPR compliance risks. Are you able to explain to a customer, how the data's been used, how a decision's been reached, through even into environmental factors. So, don't quote me on this, but I read something the other day from MIT around saying that cloud now has a larger carbon footprint than the entire airline industry. So, they're just sort of 4 or 5 areas. So I think it is all encompassing, but I think understanding across the taxonomy, I think is really key. And I think, risk should be seen as an enabler in terms of successful implementation of these tools, rather than, an inhibitor or barrier to for their use.
No, of course. And so there you have it. I mean, that I think is a very interesting way to think about the whole area. There are risks, and risk and controls functions could help you understand some of this across the taxonomy, across the sort of board, if you will. We also touched on some of the state of the art, where things were, and then we sort of looked at where things could be. So with that, we close. Any final perspectives, Maninder, and any final perspectives as we close the discussion today?
I would just add, I think it's just an exciting time, really, to be working within risk and control functions. I think sometimes many teams think it's a thankless task as such, because you're always telling people what to do. But I think it's been part of that journey, and actually empowering our risk and control teams to kind of take their views forward and have that opinion and a view on the right outcomes.
Paddy?
I think be curious. So I think, as a risk function, take the time to understand the technology and understand the potential. And equally, I think, where you have got colleagues that are, specialists in, engineering and data, I think, equally encourage them to take the time to understand, the risks and controls of the, with the activities that they're undertaking. So I think it works both sides.
Great. I think that's a great note to close on. Be curious and encourage curiosity. And so with that, we close. Thank you. Thank you, Maninder. Thank you, Paddy. I think, thank you, everyone. And we close with that.